Welcome to Deep Sleep History. Tonight, allow your mind to settle, your breath to soften, and your body to sink gently into rest. Here, the stories of the past become a quiet path into peace. Through calm, unhurried narration, we'll drift together through the echoes of time, exploring ancient worlds, forgotten empires, and the lives of people who shaped our shared human story. Let every word guide you deeper into stillness, deeper into sleep. And now, we begin our journey through history, as you drift peacefully into the night. Long before pyramids touched the horizon, before kings wore crowns and priests carved prayers into stone, there was only the Nile, winding softly through an untamed land. Its waters shimmered beneath the early sun, its banks rich with life. Thousands of years before recorded history, when much of North Africa was still lush and green, the river began shaping the destiny of a people who would one day build one of the most enduring civilizations the world has ever known. In those ancient times, small groups of hunter-gatherers roamed the region. They moved alongside herds of animals that grazed near the wetlands and marshes. They crafted tools of stone, sharpened flint blades, and gathered seeds and fruits. The world around them was changing, slowly drying, and the Sahara, which had once been a savanna alive with wildlife, became a desert. The people followed the water, the fish, the promise of survival, and so they settled near the river. Generations passed, and the relationship between humans and the Nile deepened. The river rose and fell with rhythmic predictability, spreading fertile silt across the floodplain. The people learned they could plant seeds in that soft, dark soil, and the river would feed their crops. Wheat, barley, flax, simple beginnings that would become the foundation of everything they built. As seasons turned, small farming villages emerged along the riverbanks. Mud brick homes rose in clusters. Children played in the shallows. Fishermen cast nets from small wooden boats. And each year, the Nile returned, bringing renewal. This stability shaped a worldview unlike any other. Life, to these early Egyptians, was cyclical, not a straight line, but a rhythm, a dependable pattern. What rose would set. What flooded would recede. What lived would die, and perhaps live again. These beliefs, born in the earliest settlements, would later blossom into their religion, their stories, their temples, and their eternal tombs. By around 5000 BCE, the small farming communities had grown into more complex societies. Pottery became more refined, homes larger, fields more organized. The river connected everyone, but the land began to divide itself naturally into two distinct regions, the narrow, valley-like stretch to the south, and the wide, marshy delta to the north. People in the south, in what would become Upper Egypt, lived in closer clusters along the strip of fertile land between cliffs and river. In the north, in Lower Egypt, life spread out across the green triangles of land shaped by the branching Nile. At first, these regions developed independently. Cultures diverged. Symbols evolved. The people of Upper Egypt used the tall white crown as their emblem, while those in Lower Egypt used the red crown. Their pottery styles differed, their burial customs varied, and they worshipped different local deities. Egypt was not yet a single land, it was a mosaic of small chiefdoms, each ruled by its own leader, its own traditions, its own pride. But the Nile encouraged unity. It flowed from south to north, binding the regions together. Trade increased between communities, grain for pottery, linen for copper, fish for stone tools. Boats glided along the water, carrying goods, stories, and ideas. Slowly, competition grew between the more powerful chiefdoms. Over time, two major kingdoms formed, the Kingdom of Upper Egypt in the south, and the Kingdom of Lower Egypt in the north. A time came when unity was no longer just possible, it was inevitable. Around 3100 BCE, a leader from Upper Egypt rose above all others. His name, remembered through ancient palettes and carved symbols, was Narmer. He would become the first pharaoh. Although details of his life merge with legend, artifacts depict him wearing both the white and red crowns, symbol of a land united under one ruler. Whether peaceful or through conquest, the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt transformed the Nile Valley into a single kingdom. A civilization that had taken shape over thousands of years was ready to step into the light of recorded history. Narmer established a capital at a place called Memphis, strategically located at the boundary between the two regions. From here, the early kings could oversee both the valley and the delta, ensuring that unity was more than a symbol, it was a reality. The people now shared a single crown, a single ruler, and eventually, a single identity. Writing also emerged at this time. Early hieroglyphs appeared on pottery, ivory tags, and small stone plaques. The Egyptians developed a system of pictorial symbols that represented sounds, ideas, and names. With writing, they could record goods, document laws, and inscribe the achievements of their rulers. It was one of the greatest intellectual leaps in human history. Thus began what historians call the early dynastic period, a time when the foundations of Egyptian civilization were firmly laid. Kings built tombs at Abydos and Saqqara, elaborate structures made of mud brick, some with underground chambers and decorated enclosures. These tombs were early expressions of a belief that would shape Egypt for millennia, the idea that the king lived on after death, that he became divine, and that proper rituals ensured his continued protection over the land. The pharaoh, even in these early days, was more than a king. He was a symbol of harmony, of cosmic order, of Ma'at, the balance that kept the universe from falling into chaos. To maintain Ma'at was the pharaoh's sacred duty. His leadership was not only political but spiritual. Life during this time was evolving quickly. The population increased, agriculture expanded, and trade networks reached further east and south. Copper from Sinai, gold from Nubia, timber from Lebanon, Egypt was no longer isolated. It was becoming connected to the ancient world. As generations passed, these early kings created the blueprint for what came next: central administration, taxation, organized labor, religious institutions, and monumental architecture. Egypt was preparing for its first golden age. Around 2680 BCE, the country entered the era known as the Old Kingdom, a period defined by power, stability, and incredible innovation. The kings of this time, beginning with the Third Dynasty, sought to express their divine status through architecture that touched the sky. It was during the reign of King Djoser that a visionary architect named Imhotep conceived something unprecedented: the step pyramid at Saqqara. Instead of a simple mastaba, the flat-roofed tomb used earlier, Imhotep stacked layers of stone in ascending terraces. The structure soared above the desert, the first monumental stone building in history. It marked a new era where Egypt's kings would be remembered not only through rituals but through physical monuments that could last for eternity. The step pyramid complex was vast. Courtyards, temples, shrines, and ceremonial spaces surrounded the pyramid. Its walls were carved with delicate reliefs. Its corridors were lined with blue tiles. It was more than a tomb, it was a symbol of the king's transformation into a divine being. The success of Djoser's monument inspired future kings. Architectural techniques improved. Stone cutting advanced. The workforce grew skilled in quarrying, transport, and construction. Year by year, Egyptian architects pushed their limits. This ambition reached its peak with the Fourth Dynasty, the age of the pyramid builders. By the time Sneferu came to the throne, the Egyptians were ready to experiment on a grand scale. Sneferu built at least 3 massive pyramids: the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, and possibly another at Midam. Each structure represented trial and refinement. The Bent Pyramid, with its sudden change in angle halfway up, may show an engineering adjustment. The Red Pyramid, smooth and flawless, became a model for the future. Then came Sneferu's son, Khufu. Around 2580 BCE, Khufu began a project that would define human imagination for thousands of years. On the Giza Plateau, overlooking the Nile, he ordered the construction of the Great Pyramid. At nearly 150 meters tall, built from more than 2 million stone blocks, aligned with extraordinary precision, the Great Pyramid was unmatched in scale and ambition. It required a massive workforce: artisans, stonecutters, haulers, engineers, planners, farmers working off-season, and a level of organization that showed Egypt's incredible administrative sophistication. When it was completed, the Great Pyramid shone with polished limestone casing stones that reflected the sun. It was a beacon, a staircase to the heavens, a monument to the pharaoh's eternal life. Khufu's successors continued the tradition. His son Khafre built the second pyramid at Giza and likely commissioned the Great Sphinx, a colossal statue with the body of a lion and the face of a king, gazing eternally across the desert. Menkaure, ruling after Khafre, built the third pyramid, smaller but refined, with beautiful casing stones. Together, the three pyramids formed a royal necropolis unparalleled in history. Life in the Old Kingdom thrived under this stability. The Nile continued to flood reliably, supporting agriculture. Villages grew. Craftsmen produced pottery, jewelry, and linen of high quality. The administration kept careful records: grain collection, workforce assignments, temple offerings. Trade connected Egypt to Nubia, the Levant, and the Mediterranean. The pharaoh was the center of this vast system. His word shaped the economy. His officials governed provinces, supervised irrigation, and managed temple lands. Priests performed rituals to honor the gods and secure the pharaoh's divine favor. Scribes, educated in the art of writing, documented everything, creating a culture where record-keeping and memory were sacred. But even as the Old Kingdom shone brightly, challenges lay ahead. By the end of the 5th and 6th dynasties, the power of provincial governors, nomarchs, grew. Resources were stretched. The cost of monumental building was immense. Climate changes may have caused weaker Nile floods. Famine and unrest spread. The central government weakened, and the carefully maintained balance of Maat began to tremble. Egypt entered a period of fragmentation known as the First Intermediate Period, where rival kingdoms emerged, and the once unified land fell into decentralization. The strong kingdoms of the Old Kingdom had risen like the pyramids themselves, solid, grand, seemingly eternal. But even the greatest monuments cast long shadows, and in those shadows cracks had begun to form. As the 6th dynasty faded, the once centralized power of the pharaoh weakened. Nomarchs, the governors of faraway provinces, had grown wealthy and influential. They commanded local loyalties, controlled local harvests, and in uncertain times, they began to act independently of the crown. And so, slowly and quietly, Egypt slipped out of unity. With each passing decade, central authority lost its grip, and the great structure of the Old Kingdom dissolved. By around 2180 BCE, Egypt entered what would later be called the First Intermediate Period, a time not of complete chaos, but of decentralization, of rival rulers, competing dynasties, and shifting alliances up and down the Nile. In the north, a line of kings based in Heracleopolis claimed rightful rule, carrying the ancient traditions but without the full reach of their predecessors. In the south, in Thebes, another line of rulers began to assert their claim, drawing strength from local support and deep cultural pride. And between these two competing powers, smaller regions sought their own autonomy. Though this period is sometimes remembered as dark, it was not a time of collapse but of transformation. The people adapted. Local craftsmanship flourished. Art took on regional styles. Tomb inscriptions shifted tone, speaking more personally and emotionally. Literature emerged that expressed the fears and hopes of everyday people, not just kings and priests. Among the most famous texts of this era is The Admonitions of Epure, in which a poet mourns a world turned upside down, poor becoming rich, servants acting like masters, the Nile failing to flood. Whether literal or symbolic, these writings reveal the anxieties of a society longing for stability. In the south, Theban rulers gradually gained strength. Their leaders, most notably Mentuhotep II, rallied support with both military strategy and spiritual authority. They emphasized Ma'at, the ancient order, and portrayed themselves as restorers of balance. The Thebans marched north, pushing back rival powers, and after years of conflict, Mentuhotep II succeeded in reuniting Egypt around 2050 BCE. With unity restored, Egypt entered the Middle Kingdom, often considered by the Egyptians themselves as a classical age of renewal, introspection, and cultural brilliance. The Middle Kingdom rulers were wise in their approach. They knew that grandeur alone could not hold the country together. So they implemented administrative reforms that strengthened local governance while keeping it loyal to the crown. They developed irrigation projects, reclaimed land for farming, and expanded trade networks. Stability once again returned to the Nile Valley. Pharaohs such as Amenemhat I and Senusret I re-established order, sometimes through strict control, but also through careful planning. Amenemhat moved the capital to a new city, Ichtoi, strategically placed to manage the entire land. In doing so, he signaled a fresh beginning, a symbol of renewed strength. Art and literature thrived during this period. The Middle Kingdom is the age of the great literary classics, works that later generations would copy and study in schools. Tales like The Story of Sinew, which tells of an official who flees Egypt in fear, lives among foreigners, and ultimately returns home seeking forgiveness, reveal the personal conscience and emotional depth of the time. Wisdom texts like The Instruction of Amenemhat advise rulers on loyalty and betrayal. Poetry, hymns, and philosophical reflections emerged, showing a society capable of deep thought and humane insight. Religion also evolved. While the pharaoh remained divine, the ordinary person now had more spiritual significance. The afterlife was no longer the exclusive realm of kings. The concept of the democratization of the afterlife took root. Anyone who lived with righteousness, who honored Ma'at, could hope for an eternal existence in the next world. Tombs of non-royalty grew more elaborate. Coffin texts, magical spells written on coffins and burial items, emerged to guide the dead through the challenges of the afterlife. Economically, the Middle Kingdom was vibrant. Trade flourished with Nubia, rich in gold, ivory, ebony, and cattle. Egyptian expeditions ventured into the Sinai for turquoise and copper. Boats traveled north across the Mediterranean and east across the Red Sea. The pharaohs built fortresses along the Nile to protect trade routes and maintain control. Senusret III, one of the greatest kings of the Middle Kingdom, was a bold reformer and strong military leader. He launched campaigns deep into Nubia, building massive forts such as those at Semna and Buhan. These were not simple outposts, they were complex fortifications with barracks, granaries, temples, and administrative offices. His face, carved in statues, shows a realism rare for Egyptian kings, deeply lined, serious, introspective. Some say this was deliberate symbolism, a king who carried the weight of the nation. But despite its brilliance, the Middle Kingdom could not escape the cycles of time. As the 13th dynasty progressed, central authority weakened once again. Internal struggles strained resources. Successors lacked the strength of earlier rulers. Egypt stepped into the Second Intermediate Period, a time when fragmentation returned, but with a new twist. Into the Delta region came groups from Western Asia, often referred to collectively as the Hyksos. These migrants likely arrived gradually, settling in the northeastern delta, interacting peacefully at first with local Egyptians. Over time, they gained influence, and eventually, they established their own kingship based in the city of Avaris. The Hyksos did not destroy Egyptian culture, they adopted it. They took Egyptian names, used hieroglyphs, worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own. But they also brought innovations, the horse-drawn chariot, the composite bow, new forms of bronze weapons, and novel architectural styles. These would later shape Egypt's military might. To the south, native Egyptian rulers continued to reign, particularly in Thebes, maintaining the traditions of their ancestors. However, the land was divided, Hyksos in the north, Theban rulers in the south, and smaller local powers in between. For years, there was an uneasy coexistence. Trade and diplomacy existed, but tensions grew. Stories later recorded in Egyptian texts speak of insults exchanged between Hyksos and Theban kings, of provocations and rising anger, whether literal or symbolic, they capture the mood of the time. Then came the Theban rulers determined to end foreign control. The struggle began under Seqenenretau, who died violently, his skull showing deep wounds likely from battle. His son Kamose continued the fight, launching attacks northward, reclaiming territory. And finally, Kamose's brother or son, Ahmose, rose to complete the task. Ahmose was young, driven, and supported by skilled generals and an increasingly organized army. With determination and new military technologies, including those introduced by the Hyksos, Ahmose marched north. He besieged Avaris, the Hyksos capital, driving the foreign rulers out of the delta. The conflict extended beyond Egypt into the Levant, ensuring the Hyksos could not return. With victory secured, Ahmose reunited Egypt once more around 1550 BCE, marking the end of the Second Intermediate Period and the beginning of the New Kingdom, the age of empire, of glory, of the most famous pharaohs in history. Ahmose's achievements were more than military. His reign restored confidence in the monarchy. Temples were rebuilt. Administration stabilized. New lands opened for trade and tribute. And Egypt, having learned from the technologies and tactics of its neighbors, emerged stronger than ever. The New Kingdom kings would not be content with simply defending their borders. They would expand, south into Nubia, north into the Levant, becoming a major international power. Wealth flowed into Egypt like never before: gold, cedar, spices, exotic animals, and skilled artisans from distant lands. Art blossomed, temples grew colossal, and royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings reached levels of intricacy unmatched in the ancient world. Names like Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, Seti I, and Ramesses II would soon shape Egyptian legacy forever. But before their stories unfold, Egypt stood at the threshold of a new chapter, reborn, unified, and ready to step onto the world stage with power, ambition, and a renewed sense of divine destiny. The river flowed steadily. The land thrived. The gods watched. And the new kingdom was rising. The rise of the new kingdom marked a new dawn along the Nile, a time when Egypt re-emerged with strength, ambition, and a renewed sense of divine purpose. After the turmoil of the Hyksos period and the struggles for reunification, the land breathed again under the leadership of energetic kings who sought not only to protect Egypt but to expand its influence far beyond its borders. Ahmose I, the founder of the 18th dynasty, brought stability through military discipline and strategic brilliance. His victories over the Hyksos restored unity to the two lands, and with peace restored, Egypt entered an age of creativity and power. Temples were rebuilt, fields returned to cultivation, and long-distance trade resumed. Under Ahmose, the seeds of an empire were planted. His successors, including Amenhotep I and Thutmose I, carried this legacy forward. Amenhotep I strengthened the bureaucracy and honored the gods with new temples. He supported the community of artisans at Deir el-Medina, who carved the tombs of pharaohs with care and devotion. Thutmose I, bold and visionary, pushed Egypt's boundaries south into Nubia and north into Syria, marking Egypt's arrival as a dominant force in the Near East. With each generation, Egypt grew wealthier, more confident. Soldiers returned from campaigns with tribute, gold, cattle, incense, lapis, cedar, and skilled workers captured or offered from distant lands. Diplomats traveled across borders, exchanging gifts and forging alliances. And priesthoods grew in influence as temples expanded, serving not only as spiritual centers but as economic and administrative powerhouses. In this world of rising prosperity, a remarkable figure emerged, one who would challenge tradition, rewrite expectations, and shape the destiny of Egypt in ways no woman before her had dared. Her name was Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut, born a royal daughter, was never destined, at least in the eyes of tradition, to rule as king. Yet she possessed intelligence, education, and political awareness that set her apart from the beginning. She had been trained in the rituals of the gods, the workings of the palace, and the responsibilities of governance. She served as queen to her half-brother Thutmose II, and upon his death, she became regent for the young Thutmose III. But regency was not enough for Hatshepsut. She believed she had a divine mandate to rule Egypt not as queen, but as pharaoh. Step by step, she elevated her status, supported by powerful officials and priests who recognized her capability. She adopted royal titles, performed kingly rituals, and eventually wore the full regalia of a pharaoh, including the traditional false beard and kilt. Her reign was peaceful, prosperous, and transformative. Instead of focusing on warfare, she concentrated on building projects, economic expansion, and spiritual renewal. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari rose from the cliffs in graceful terraces, a structure so harmonious and elegant that even today it is considered one of the masterpieces of ancient architecture. Under Hatshepsut, trade flourished. She restored connections with Punt, a distant land rich in incense and exotic goods. Egyptian ships traveled the Red Sea, returning with myrrh trees, gold, ebony, panther skins, and fragrant resins. Reliefs carved on her temple show detailed scenes of life in Punt, its rulers, its houses, its animals, preserving a rare glimpse into a faraway kingdom. Meanwhile, the young Thutmose III grew up in the shadows of her rule. When Hatshepsut passed away, he ascended the throne as the sole ruler of Egypt. And it was then that his true legacy began. Thutmose III transformed Egypt into a military powerhouse. He led numerous campaigns through Canaan and Syria, reasserting Egyptian control and expanding its borders further than ever before. His victory at Megiddo, achieved through cunning strategy, became legendary. He recorded his military exploits meticulously, listing spoils of war, tribute from conquered lands, and scenes of victory that decorated the walls of the Karnak temple. Yet Thutmose was not only a warrior. He supported the arts, commissioned temples, encouraged innovation, and stabilized the administration. His reign, long and accomplished, became the model of a successful pharaoh. Egypt entered a golden period under his rule, marked by confidence, wealth, and prestige. After Thutmose III came Amenhotep II, a strong and athletic king known for his physical prowess and archery skill. He continued Egypt's military campaigns but also emphasized royal authority. His successors, including Thutmose IV, maintained the empire and added to Egypt's monumental landscape. Thutmose IV is remembered for restoring the Great Sphinx, clearing it of sand and placing the dream stele between its paws. But the new kingdom's radiance would soon reach an even greater peak under the rule of Amenhotep III, a king whose reign embodied luxury, diplomacy, and artistic brilliance. After the death of Tutankhamun and the brief reigns of Ay and Horemheb, Egypt once again stood at a crossroads. The ideals of tradition had returned after the shock of Akhenaten's religious revolution, but stability needed more than pious intentions. It needed leadership, strong, disciplined, and grounded in the old structures of power. Horemheb, though not born of royal blood, was precisely such a leader. He had risen from the ranks of the military, a seasoned commander who had seen firsthand the consequences of political instability. He was determined to restore order to Egypt's government and revive the empire's foreign influence. One of his first actions as king was to distance the administration from the Amarna period. Edicts were issued condemning corruption. Officials who had abandoned their duties during the turbulent years were punished. Local governance was reorganized. Temples, drained under Akhenaten's monotheistic experiment, were replenished and restored. Horemheb also re-established ties with foreign lands. He strengthened the army, trained new units, and ensured Egypt's borders were secure. But perhaps his most significant act was choosing a successor. Lacking an heir himself, Horemheb appointed his vizier and fellow military leader, Paramessu, to follow him on the throne. This decision would shape the next century of Egyptian history. When Horemheb died, Paramessu became Ramesses I, the founder of the 19th dynasty, a line of kings who would dominate the new kingdom's final golden age. Ramesses I, though elderly when he assumed the throne, set the stage for his descendants. His reign was short, perhaps only a year or two, but he established a dynasty rooted in military strength and devotion to traditional gods. His son, Seti I, would become one of Egypt's finest rulers. Seti I inherited a revived but still vulnerable empire. He moved decisively to secure Egypt's territories in the Levant, pushing back against the Hittites, who had grown powerful in Anatolia and Syria. Seti's campaigns were meticulously planned, and his military inscriptions depict him as a fearless warrior. He led troops through Canaan, reclaimed rebellious cities, and confronted the expanding Hittite influence head-on. These campaigns were not simply matters of territory, they were symbolic. They demonstrated that Egypt was once again asserting itself on the international stage. Diplomacy also played a role. Egypt exchanged gifts and communication with Babylon and Assyria, maintaining balance across the region. Seti I was not only a warrior, he was a builder of immense ambition. In Thebes, he began the construction of the magnificent temple of Karnak's hypostyle hall, a forest of colossal columns carved with detailed reliefs. The hall remains one of the greatest architectural achievements of the ancient world. It feels like a stone cathedral of light and shadow, a sacred grove of monumental pillars rising toward the sky. Seti also built a beautifully decorated tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The walls of his burial chamber are covered with scenes from the Book of the Dead and other funerary texts, rendered with artistic precision. Every brushstroke speaks of devotion, craftsmanship, and the belief that death was only the beginning of a longer journey. But Seti's reign, though prosperous, was only part of a greater story. His son would become one of Egypt's most famous kings, the mighty Ramesses II, a name that would echo through the centuries. Ramesses II, often called Ramesses the Great, was blessed with a long life, a bold personality, and boundless ambition. His reign lasted nearly 67 years, one of the longest in world history. When he ascended the throne as a young man, he inherited a strong military, a wealthy kingdom, and a father's legacy of greatness to uphold. Ramesses quickly embarked on military campaigns to secure Egypt's borders. His most famous encounter was with the Hittite Empire at the city of Kadesh, located in modern-day Syria. The Battle of Kadesh was a massive conflict involving thousands of chariots, the largest chariot battle known to history. Ramesses himself was nearly captured but managed to rally his troops in a dramatic turnaround. Though the battle ended in a stalemate, Ramesses used masterful propaganda to portray it as a heroic victory. Reliefs across Egypt show him charging fearlessly into battle, pulling wounded soldiers onto his chariot, and calling on the god Ammonius for strength. Historians admire not only the military significance but also the political brilliance of these narratives, which shaped Ramesses' legacy. But Ramesses was not only a warrior. He was a prolific builder whose monuments transformed Egypt's landscape. He completed the hypostyle hall begun by Seti I. In Luxor and Thebes, he added colossal statues and intricately carved reliefs. He constructed new cities, including Paramesses, his sprawling capital in the delta. One of his most awe-inspiring achievements lies far to the south, the temples of Abu Simbel. Carved directly into the cliffs above the Nile, the Great Temple features 4 colossal statues of Ramesses seated in eternal majesty. Within the temple, sunlight was engineered to penetrate deep into the sanctuary on specific days of the year, illuminating statues of the gods, and Ramesses himself. This extraordinary alignment showed not only architectural genius but also the king's desire to merge his identity with the divine cosmos. Beside the great temple stands the temple dedicated to his beloved queen, Nefertari. Its facade displays 6 massive statues, 4 of Ramesses, but notably 2 of Nefertari. This equal representation was rare and reveals her honored position in the royal household. The inscription inside declares, "For whom the sun shines," a poetic tribute to her. Ramesses II fathered many children, more than 100 by some counts, and his family line filled Egypt with princes and princesses who served in temples, the military, and administration. His reign provided stability, prosperity, and cultural flourishing. Artisans carved exquisite reliefs, scribes recorded poetry and hymns, and architects continued to push the boundaries of Egyptian design. Yet no reign lasts forever. As Ramesses II aged, new challenges emerged. The empire stretched thin. Tribute and trade fluctuated. Internally, corruption crept into the bureaucracy. When Ramesses died at around 90 years old, Egypt mourned the loss of one of its greatest leaders, but it also faced a difficult transition. His long reign had delayed succession for decades. His chosen heir, Merneptah, was already elderly when he became pharaoh. He faced invasions from Libyan tribes and the mysterious Sea Peoples, groups of raiders and migrants whose movements destabilized civilizations across the Mediterranean. Merneptah managed to defend Egypt, but resources were strained. Later Ramesside kings, Seti II, Siptah, Tosret, saw a rising internal conflict. Factional struggles erupted in the court. Rival claimants challenged the throne. Meanwhile, outside powers continued to test Egypt's borders. As the 20th dynasty rose, led by Setnakht and his son Ramesses III, Egypt experienced a final burst of military might. Ramesses III, the last great warrior pharaoh, defeated waves of Sea Peoples in fierce battles along the delta, preserving Egypt from collapse. But beneath these victories lay economic troubles. Tomb workers at Deir el-Medina staged the first recorded labor strike in history due to delayed rations. Corruption investigations, inflation, and internal conspiracies, including the famous Harem conspiracy to assassinate Ramesses III, revealed deep cracks in Egyptian society. After Ramesses III, the kings who followed bore his name but none of his strength. Ramesses IV, VI, and others struggled to maintain even a shadow of past glory. The empire shrank. Foreign influence grew. Tombs were robbed, grain supplies dwindled, and the priesthood of Ammonius in Thebes gained immense power, rivaling the pharaohs themselves. By the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt, once the most powerful nation in the world, stood weakened. Its monuments still stood tall, but their builders faced uncertainty. Internal fragmentation and foreign pressures began to pull at the seams of the empire. The story of Egypt was shifting again. And soon, new dynasties, new rulers, and foreign powers would rise and fall across the Nile Valley. But for now, as the sun sets on the last great pharaohs of the New Kingdom, their voices echo through time, etched in stone, painted on tomb walls, whispered across desert winds, the enduring legacy of Egypt's most radiant age. As the reign of Ramesses III drew to a close, the golden glow of the New Kingdom began to fade. Egypt, though still adorned with monumental temples and rich cultural memory, was burdened by a slow unraveling from within. Ramesses III had held the empire together through military strength and determination, but beneath the surface, centrifugal forces were pulling the kingdom apart. His victories over invading forces, especially the Sea Peoples, preserved Egypt's independence, but the cost of constant warfare weighed heavily on the economy. Grain supplies diminished, taxes rose, and the wealth once flowing abundantly through the temples and royal treasuries began to strain. The enormous construction programs of the Ramesside kings had drained manpower and resources, and administrative corruption subtly crept into all levels of governance. During Ramesses III's reign, an event occurred that gives us a rare, human glimpse into life at the time. The workers of Deir el-Medina, those skilled artisans who carved and painted the royal tombs, stopped working and confronted their officials. They had not received their food rations, the payment for their labor. Their protest is the first recorded labor strike in human history. They marched to local temples, sat down, and demanded fairness. Their voices, preserved in papyrus records, remind us that even in this ancient world, people understood their worth and the need for justice. But the most dramatic event of Ramesses III's final years was the Harem conspiracy. A group within his own household, wives, officials, and servants, plotted to kill the king and place another son on the throne. Trial transcripts reveal interrogations, confessions, and harsh punishments. Evidence suggests Ramesses III was indeed fatally wounded, possibly by a strike to the throat, though Egypt maintained the facade of a peaceful royal death. His son, Ramesses IV, attempted to revive some of his father's vigor, but the kingdom's downward trajectory had already begun. Each subsequent king, Ramesses V, 6, 7, 8, 9, x, 11, seemed to rule over a shrinking world. Their names echoed the grandeur of Ramesses the Great, but their power was only a shadow of his. Fragmentation intensified. The wealth that once sustained the temples dwindled. Priests struggled to maintain rituals. Provincial leaders asserted autonomy. Most critical of all, the high priests of Ammonius in Thebes gained extraordinary influence. With vast temple lands and an army of loyal workers, they controlled more wealth than the pharaohs themselves. By the end of the 20th dynasty, Egypt was effectively split in two, the north ruled by the pharaoh and his officials, the south dominated by the Ammonius priesthood. Thus began the Third Intermediate Period, a complex era of divided rule, shifting alliances, and foreign influence. Egypt was no longer the unquestioned master of its region. Instead of strong central authority, the kingdom saw overlapping dynasties, local rulers, and families rising to power through military or economic means. In the northern delta, families of Libyan descent began to dominate. These Libyans had lived in Egypt for generations, serving as soldiers and settling in the frontier regions. Over time, they assimilated into Egyptian culture, married into local elites, and established themselves as leaders. The most prominent of these would form the 22nd dynasty, beginning with Shoshenkai. Shoshenkai, once a powerful military commander, became pharaoh and sought to restore some degree of unity. His inscriptions boast of campaigns into Canaan and victories over rebellious cities. Some historians identify him with the biblical Shishak, who plundered Jerusalem. His rule marked a resurgence of central authority, but the unity was fragile. While the Libyan dynasties controlled the north, the south, centered around Thebes, remained under the spiritual and political influence of the Ammonius priesthood. Egypt was divided culturally and politically, though daily life continued with surprising stability for ordinary people. Farmers still tilled the fields by the Nile. Merchants traded goods up and down the river. Temples maintained festivals. Children played along the riverbanks. For most Egyptians, life followed familiar rhythms even as political landscapes shifted. But a major new power was rising to the south, the kingdom of Kush in Nubia. For centuries, the Egyptians had exerted influence over Nubia, building forts and temples and integrating it into their empire. But with Egypt's weakening, Nubia reasserted independence and grew strong. The city of Napata became a center of power, culture, and spiritual devotion. The Nubians deeply admired Egyptian religion and adopted many of its traditions. Their kings saw themselves as legitimate heirs to the pharaonic legacy. One such king, Pi, saw Egypt's fragmentation as both a crisis and an opportunity. Around the 8th century BCE, he launched a campaign northward, not as a conqueror of foreign lands but as a restorer of ancient order. His inscriptions, carved on a famous stela, describe his disgust at the disunity he found in Egypt, petty rulers fighting for power, temples neglected, sacred traditions ignored. Pi's tone was not one of violent conquest but of cleansing. He approached Egypt with reverence, making offerings to the gods at every step. When he took control of Memphis and other key cities, he did so with ritualistic formality. He demanded loyalty from local rulers, many of whom submitted willingly. To him, restoring Egypt was a divine mission. Thus began the Kushite 25th dynasty, a remarkable chapter in Egyptian history where Nubian kings ruled the Nile Valley. Kings like Shabaka, Shabitku, and especially Taharka presided over a renaissance of traditional Egyptian culture. They restored temples, revived artistic styles reminiscent of the Old Kingdom, and strengthened religious institutions. Statues from this period show powerful figures with Nubian features proudly wearing the pharaonic regalia. Under Taharka, Egypt experienced a brief resurgence. He engaged diplomatically with powerful kingdoms such as the Assyrians and even appears in biblical narratives. His reign saw monumental building in both Egypt and Nubia, symbolizing unity across the two lands. But Egypt's revival drew the attention of a formidable empire to the northeast, Assyria. The Assyrians, centered in Mesopotamia, had built an empire through efficient administration and ruthless military campaigns. Their armies were well trained, equipped with iron weapons, and supported by siege engines and cavalry. They saw Egypt's influence as a threat to their control over the Near East. Conflict was inevitable. Assyrian king Esarhaddon marched into Egypt and engaged Taharka's forces. After fierce battles, the Assyrians captured Memphis and forced Taharka to retreat south. But the struggle did not end there. When Taharka attempted to reassert influence, the Assyrians returned under Esarhaddon's successor, Ashurbanipal, capturing Thebes, then called Wazit, and plundering its immense wealth. The fall of Thebes in 663 BCE was a blow not only to Nubian power but to the identity of Egypt itself. Temples were looted, treasures carried away, and the spiritual heart of Egypt shaken. Though life continued along the Nile, it was clear Egypt was no longer the master of its destiny. Into this power vacuum stepped a new local dynasty in the Delta, the Sate dynasty, beginning with Psamtik I, supported at first by the Assyrians. Psamtik gradually unified Egypt through diplomacy and strategic alliances. He expelled foreign garrisons, strengthened the navy, and reconnected Egypt to Mediterranean trade. Under the Sate rulers, Egypt experienced a final flowering, a late-period renaissance. Artisans revived ancient styles with remarkable precision. Scribes copied texts thousands of years old. Temples were restored, and the priesthood regained influence. Greek mercenaries, traders, and scholars arrived in greater numbers, establishing communities such as Naucratis, a Greek trading port sanctioned by the Egyptians. The Sate rulers maintained independence for a time, but new powers were rising in the east. Babylon conquered Assyria. Persia began to expand. The world around Egypt was changing rapidly, and though the Nile kingdoms held to their traditions, they could not escape the broader currents of history. Eventually, in 525 BCE, Persian king Cambyses II invaded Egypt. After defeating Psamtik III at Pelusium, he took control of the Nile Valley. The Persian Empire absorbed Egypt, marking the end of native pharaonic rule, for the moment. Yet Egypt's story was not over. Not by far. Foreign rule would bring new interactions, new challenges, and new rebirths. The Persians would come. The Greeks under Alexander the Great would come. The Romans would come. Each era would leave its imprint on the ancient land. But the spirit of Egypt, its gods, its monuments, its stories carved in stone, persisted through it all, whispering through the ages, kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall, but the Nile endures. The fall of Egypt to the Persians marked a new era in the long journey of the Nile Valley. For the first time in its history, Egypt was absorbed into a vast foreign empire led by distant rulers who spoke another language, practiced different customs, and worshipped unfamiliar gods. Yet even under foreign rule, the Egyptians remained deeply connected to their identity, their traditions, and their sense of heritage. When Cambyses II, king of Persia, conquered Egypt in 525 BCE, he declared himself pharaoh in the traditional manner. He respected Egyptian customs enough to participate in local rituals, though his relationship with the priesthood and people was complicated. Greek historians later accused him of sacrilege, but such stories may reflect bias rather than fact. What is certain is that Egypt's political independence was gone. The Persians integrated Egypt into their empire as a satrapy, a provincial district governed by a satrap appointed by the Persian king. Yet daily life changed little for ordinary Egyptians. Farmers continued to cultivate the Nile fields. Scribes recorded harvests and taxes. Temples held ceremonies to honor ancient gods. But the sense of sovereignty had shifted. Power now flowed from faraway capitals like Susa and Persepolis. Still, resistance simmered beneath the surface. Several rebellions broke out over the next century as Egyptians sought to reclaim their independence. Among the rebels were Libyan chieftains, discontent local leaders, and native princes who claimed the ancient right to rule the two lands. Some of these uprisings briefly succeeded, but none could permanently break free, until a dramatic window of opportunity appeared. When Persia faced internal turmoil and external threats, Egypt rose again. In 404 BCE, a leader named Amartius successfully drove out the Persians and declared himself king, founding the 28th dynasty. This short-lived resurgence was followed by the 29th and 30th dynasties, as Egyptians tasted independence once more. Under these local rulers, especially Nectanebo I and Nectanebo II, Egypt attempted to revive its political and cultural glory. Temples were restored, and construction resumed across the land. Sculptures and reliefs from this period show remarkable craftsmanship, echoing the styles of earlier dynasties. Yet the world had changed. Persia remained powerful. Greek cities were rising in influence. And Egypt was caught in the crosscurrents of global politics. In 343 BCE, Persian king Artaxerxes III reconquered Egypt after fierce battles. The temples suffered damage, and many Egyptian officials were replaced with Persian administrators. This second Persian period was harsh and short, lasting less than a decade. Egyptian resistance persisted, but it appeared that independence was gone for good. And then, suddenly, a new player entered history, one who would alter not just Egypt, but the entire ancient world. Alexander the Great, king of Macedon, swept across Persia in a campaign that astonished historians for centuries. His armies smashed through Persian defenses, conquering Asia Minor, Syria, and the Levant. The path to Egypt lay open. In 332 BCE, Alexander marched into Egypt. But instead of resistance, he found a people eager for liberation from Persian rule. The Egyptians welcomed him as a savior, embracing him with ceremonies and honors. At the temple of Ammonius in Siwa, an oasis deep in the desert, Alexander was declared the son of the god Ammonius, a title with immense spiritual and political significance. For the Egyptians, this was not merely flattery but a confirmation that their new ruler respected their gods, their traditions, and their cosmic order. Alexander offered sacrifice to the deities, restored temples, and planned new cities. Among these cities was Alexandria, founded at a strategic spot on the Mediterranean coast. Few could have predicted that this city would soon become one of the greatest cultural centers in history. Alexandria was designed with wide streets, harbors, and grand buildings. It quickly grew into a hub of commerce, scholarship, and international exchange. Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, and other communities mingled, creating a cosmopolitan environment unlike anything seen before in the region. But Alexander's time in Egypt was short. He left to continue his conquests, reaching as far as India before his sudden death in 323 BCE. His empire, vast but fragile, fractured among his generals. Egypt fell into the hands of his trusted companion and strategist, Ptolemy, son of Lagus. Ptolemy realized that Egypt, with its fertile land, ancient prestige, and central location, was the prize of Alexander's legacy. He established himself as ruler and later took the title of pharaoh, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty, the final dynasty of ancient Egypt. Under Ptolemy I, Egypt experienced renewed stability. He strengthened Alexandria's defenses, encouraged trade, and laid the foundation for a flourishing intellectual center. He also founded the Library of Alexandria, a monumental institution intended to gather knowledge from all corners of the known world. Scholars were brought from Greece, Babylon, Phoenicia, and beyond. Works on mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, medicine, and literature were collected, studied, and translated. The Ptolemies embraced Egyptian culture to legitimize their rule. They participated in ancient ceremonies, honored the gods, and supported the priesthood. Temples were built in traditional styles, blending Greek and Egyptian artistic forms. Deities like Isis and Horus were worshipped alongside Greek gods such as Zeus and Athena. Yet the Ptolemies also brought their own customs. Greek became the language of administration and scholarship. The ruling elite were often Greek or Macedonian, creating a society with distinct cultural layers. At times, tensions rose between Greeks and native Egyptians, but the kingdom generally thrived. Ptolemy II, known as Philadelphus, expanded the library, developed a zoo containing exotic animals, and sponsored major construction projects. He also supported the translation of foreign texts into Greek. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, is said to have been produced in Alexandria during his reign. Trade flourished. Egypt exported grain, papyrus, linen, and glass. Caravans crossed the deserts, and ships sailed to the Red Sea and Mediterranean. The wealth flowing into Alexandria made the city a marvel of the ancient world. Philosophers, poets, mathematicians, and scientists found patronage in its halls. Figures like Euclid, the father of geometry, and Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy, worked there. Still, the Ptolemaic kingdom was not immune to conflict. Successions often involved intrigue, rivalries, and assassinations. Royal marriages, frequently between siblings, were used to consolidate power but also fueled internal strife. The court became known for its political complexities, with queens and kings maneuvering for dominance. One of the most formidable queens of this era was Arsinoe II, sister and wife of Ptolemy II, who wielded significant influence. Another was Cleopatra II, whose life was marked by dramatic alliances and wars. The Ptolemaic world was vibrant but often turbulent, its rulers wealthy yet precariously positioned in a Mediterranean landscape increasingly dominated by the rising power of Rome. Egypt remained rich but structurally fragile, held together by the brilliance of its scholars, the productivity of its farmland, and the charisma of its rulers. Yet beneath the grandeur lay shifting politics, regional unrest, and external pressures that hinted at eventual decline. The Ptolemies would rule Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, blending Greek and Egyptian traditions into a unique cultural tapestry. Their reign would culminate in the life of one extraordinary queen whose story captured the imagination of the world, Cleopatra VII. But her story, and the dramatic end of pharaonic Egypt, lies ahead. For now, as the sun sets on the early Ptolemaic age, the bustling streets of Alexandria glow with lantern light. Scholars debate in colonnaded courtyards. Ships unload cargo from distant lands. Priests chant prayers in temples dedicated to ancient gods. And somewhere in the royal palace, heirs to Alexander's legacy contemplate the future of a land that has seen more rises and falls than any nation on earth. Egypt, transformed yet eternal, continues its voyage through the river of time. As generations passed under the Ptolemaic dynasty, Egypt remained a land of immense wealth, vibrant culture, and strategic importance. Yet beneath the outward majesty of Alexandria's gleaming buildings and its cosmopolitan society lay constant tension. The Ptolemies ruled a kingdom that was both Greek and Egyptian, both ancient and new, both united and divided. Their reign was a delicate balancing act between embracing local traditions and maintaining Hellenistic authority, between projecting strength and managing internal strife. Over time, this balance grew harder to maintain. The royal family, descendants of Ptolemy I, often found themselves entangled in bitter rivalries. Siblings competed for the throne. Cousins plotted coups. Ministers and generals formed alliances that could shift the fate of the kingdom overnight. The Ptolemies had inherited Alexander's empire but not always his vision or his unity of command. Kings such as Ptolemy III Euergetes brought periods of strong leadership, expanding Egyptian influence and supporting scholarship and trade. But later rulers, including Ptolemy IV Philopator and Ptolemy V, faced internal rebellions and foreign pressures. Egyptian nationalism surged as native communities grew frustrated with Greek dominance. The vast kingdom became harder to govern as regions like Upper Egypt chafed under the central authority of Alexandria. The Ptolemies relied increasingly on foreign mercenaries, Greek, Galatian, Jewish, and Thracian, to maintain control. This added layers of complexity to the political landscape. To the outside world, Egypt remained wealthy and powerful. But the internal fabric of the kingdom was fraying. Meanwhile, far to the west, a new force was rising. Rome, once a modest city-state, began expanding across Italy, then across the Mediterranean. Its legions, organized with unmatched discipline, conquered Carthage, subdued Greece, and asserted dominance over Asia Minor. Rome became the central power in the Mediterranean world, and every kingdom, weak or strong, felt its influence. The Ptolemies were no exception. As conflicts erupted between Ptolemaic rulers, they often sought Rome's support to strengthen their claim to the throne. Each appeal, each promise, each favor traded with Roman senators and generals increased Rome's leverage over Egypt. The Nile Kingdom, once a global superpower, was gradually becoming dependent on a foreign empire. By the 2nd century BCE, Rome frequently intervened in Egyptian affairs. When Ptolemy VI and Ptolemy VIII clashed, Rome acted as mediator. When Cyprus was annexed by Rome during the reign of Ptolemy XII Auletes, it revealed just how vulnerable the dynasty had become. This was the world into which Cleopatra VII, the famous last ruler of Egypt, was born. She came into the world in 69 BCE, daughter of Ptolemy XII Auletes, a king whose nickname, Auletes, meaning the flutist, hinted at his reputation for indulgence rather than leadership. Ptolemy XII's reign was unstable. Bribery, diplomacy, and Roman alliances were the tools he used to keep the throne. His relationship with the priesthood was strained. He spent enormous sums of money trying to curry favor with Roman power brokers. Cleopatra was raised in the royal palace of Alexandria, a world of luxury and learning, but also of intense political intrigue. She grew up surrounded by scholars, philosophers, and tutors who taught her languages, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. The Ptolemies had long supported the intellectual traditions of Alexandria, and Cleopatra benefited from access to some of the greatest scholars of the age. Unlike many of her ancestors, Cleopatra embraced not only Greek culture but also Egyptian identity. She learned to speak Egyptian, something very few Ptolemies did. She studied the rituals, symbols, and theology of the native religion. She was trained to present herself as the living embodiment of Isis, the great mother goddess. This cultural fluency later helped her connect with the Egyptian people in a way no Ptolemy before her had achieved. But the royal household was dangerous. Siblings were rivals, not companions. Alliances shifted with every rumor. And the shadow of Rome loomed over every decision. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, was driven from Egypt at one point, replaced by a rival faction. He fled to Rome seeking help, offering bribes and promises to regain his throne. Rome accepted. With Roman military backing, Ptolemy XII returned to Alexandria and punished those who had opposed him. Cleopatra, still young, witnessed firsthand how fragile royal power could be, and how essential Roman support was. When her father died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra became ruler alongside her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, as required by ancient tradition. But Cleopatra, charismatic and intelligent, acted independently. She appeared on coins alone, without her brother's image, an unmistakable sign that she intended to govern in her own right. The court reacted swiftly. Advisors loyal to Ptolemy XIII, particularly the influential eunuch Pothinus and the general Achillas, saw Cleopatra's independence as a threat. They moved to strip her of authority, forcing her to flee Alexandria. Cleopatra retreated to the eastern deserts, gathering support and preparing to reclaim her position. At this moment, as the siblings prepared for a civil war, a new force entered the Egyptian stage, one that would alter the course of history. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar, Rome's most powerful general, arrived in Alexandria while pursuing his rival, Pompey Magnus. Caesar had defeated Pompey's forces at Pharsalus, and Pompey fled to Egypt seeking refuge. But the advisors of Ptolemy XIII, hoping to win Caesar's favor, murdered Pompey on the shores of Egypt before the Roman general arrived. When Caesar landed in Alexandria and was presented with Pompey's severed head as a gift, he did not react with gratitude. Instead, he was horrified. Pompey had once been his son-in-law and a former ally. This act of brutality angered Caesar and altered his view of the Egyptian court. Caesar decided to intervene in Egyptian politics, not for conquest, but to restore stability and ensure that Rome's interests were protected. He summoned Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII to the palace, demanding they resolve their disputes. But Cleopatra was still in exile, barred by her enemies from entering the city. According to legend, one of the most famous tales in ancient history, Cleopatra found a daring way to reach Caesar. She is said to have wrapped herself in a carpet or linen sack and had herself smuggled into the palace, unrolled dramatically at Caesar's feet. Whether this exact detail is literal or symbolic, it reflects the boldness with which Cleopatra approached power. Caesar was captivated, not only by her appearance, but by her intelligence, her confidence, and her command of diplomacy. Cleopatra spoke several languages fluently. She understood politics deeply. She possessed charm and rhetorical skill. She met Caesar as an equal, not a supplicant. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra was restored as queen. But her brother's faction refused to accept this outcome. Civil war broke out in Alexandria. Caesar and Cleopatra's forces defended the palace quarter against Ptolemy's army. Fighting consumed the city's harbor, leading to fires that may have damaged parts of the Library of Alexandria, though the exact extent of destruction remains debated. During this conflict, Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile while attempting to flee after a major defeat. Cleopatra's younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, was placed beside her as co-ruler, though Cleopatra remained the dominant power. After the victory, Caesar spent several months in Egypt, during which he and Cleopatra grew close. Their relationship, though often romanticized, was deeply political, two ambitious rulers forming an alliance that benefited both. Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, named Ptolemy XV but known popularly as Caesar Ion, meaning Little Caesar. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra stabilized her hold on the throne. She traveled to Rome, where Caesar displayed a golden statue of her in the Temple of Venus Genetrix, a bold gesture that scandalized many Romans but elevated her status in the ancient world. Yet Cleopatra's alliance with Rome was far from over, and her story, intertwined with Caesar, with Mark Antony, and with the fate of two great empires, was only beginning. For now, Alexandria stood at the height of its glory. Markets bustled with traders from across the Mediterranean. Scholars debated in colonnades. Priests performed ancient rituals in newly restored temples. The royal palace shimmered with marble, gold, and the sound of musicians and poets. But beneath this splendor, history was gathering its momentum. The Roman world was approaching a turning point. And the life of Cleopatra, already touched by power and ambition, would soon become inseparable from the final chapter of ancient Egypt. The years Cleopatra spent aligned with Julius Caesar brought Egypt a brief period of stability and unprecedented influence in Roman affairs. Her presence in Rome was both celebrated and controversial. She lived in Caesar's villa across the Tiber, accompanied by servants, advisors, and her infant son Caesar Ion. Romans whispered constantly, some enchanted by her brilliance, others unsettled by her power. Cleopatra was unlike any queen Rome had ever seen, multilingual, politically fierce, financially independent, and commanding enough to stand alongside Caesar himself. But this era of delicate balance came to a sudden, violent end. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was assassinated in the Roman Senate. A group of senators, fearing Caesar's rising authority, his reforms, and his rumored desire for kingship, struck him down with knives. His blood stained the marble floor, and the echo of that moment rippled across the world. Cleopatra, still in Rome at the time, immediately sensed the danger. Without Caesar's protection, she and her son were vulnerable. The political landscape shifted violently as Caesar's assassins clashed with his loyalists. Rome teetered on the edge of chaos. Cleopatra quietly withdrew, returning to Egypt as swiftly as possible. Back in Alexandria, she refocused her attention on her kingdom. Cleopatra had long understood that Egypt's survival depended on aligning with Rome's dominant factions. Now, she needed to navigate a new world of Roman power struggles, one where loyalties shifted quickly and alliances could determine the fate of nations. After Caesar's death, power in Rome fractured among three major figures: Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted general; Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and future emperor; and Lepidus, a political ally. Together they formed the Second Triumvirate, a ruling coalition designed to defeat Caesar's assassins and restore order. But beneath their alliance lay deep rivalries. In the early years of the Triumvirate, Mark Antony commanded the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire, a region that included Egypt. His responsibilities required immense resources, armies to be supplied, territories to be stabilized, and threats from Parthia in the east to be confronted. Antony needed money, grain, and naval support. Cleopatra was the only ruler in the region who could provide all three. In 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, a Greek city in Asia Minor. Cleopatra, sensing opportunity, made her arrival a spectacle worthy of legend. Ancient accounts describe her sailing up the river Cydnus in a magnificent barge adorned with gold and purple, perfumed with incense, and filled with musicians. Cleopatra herself was said to be dressed as the goddess Isis, reclining beneath a canopy as attendants fanned her gently. Whether entirely literal or embellished by ancient writers, the imagery reflects Cleopatra's mastery of symbolism and diplomacy. She intended to impress Antony, not merely with her beauty, but with her command of culture, wealth, and presentation. Antony was captivated. But his fascination went deeper than admiration. Cleopatra understood statecraft, and Antony recognized in her a partner who could help him secure the resources needed for his campaigns. Their alliance was both political and personal from the beginning. Cleopatra returned with Antony to Alexandria, where their relationship flourished. They dined together, debated philosophy, planned military campaigns, and created a circle of friends known for nights of feasting, music, and theatrical games. Egyptians adored Antony, seeing him not as a conqueror but as an ally who treated their queen as an equal. In time, Cleopatra bore him twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Later, a third child, Ptolemy Philadelphus, was born. Their growing family symbolized a political vision shared by Antony and Cleopatra, one where Egypt and Rome together shaped the eastern Mediterranean. Yet while Antony and Cleopatra strengthened their alliance in the east, Octavian strengthened his position in Rome. Octavian, young and calculating, presented himself as the guardian of Roman tradition and the rightful heir of Caesar. He cultivated public support, outmaneuvered rivals, and quietly undermined Antony's reputation among the Roman people. Any misstep by Antony was twisted into propaganda. His relationship with Cleopatra, framed by Octavian as a dangerous entanglement with a foreign queen, became a tool for shaping public opinion. As Roman politics drifted toward confrontation, Antony prepared for a major campaign against Parthia, Rome's powerful eastern rival. But the campaign faltered, weakened by harsh weather, logistical failures, and betrayal by local allies. Antony's legions suffered heavy losses, and he withdrew to Alexandria to recover. Cleopatra provided troops, money, and supplies to rebuild Antony's forces. Their political partnership deepened. They held grand ceremonies in Alexandria, proclaiming their children as rulers of territories across the eastern Mediterranean. Cleopatra was declared Queen of Kings, and Caesar Ion was presented as Caesar's legitimate heir. To Antony and Cleopatra, this was the foundation of a prosperous Eastern alliance. To Octavian, it was a direct challenge. Back in Rome, Octavian seized upon these ceremonies to paint Antony as a traitor, an ambitious man who intended to betray Rome and establish a foreign empire under Cleopatra's influence. He distributed forged documents, manipulated the Senate, and crafted speeches that inflamed public fear. The Senate, pressured by Octavian, eventually declared war, not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra herself. This subtle framing allowed Octavian to appeal to Roman pride. It was not a civil war, he claimed, but a defensive war against a foreign monarch who threatened Rome. Antony's soldiers, many of whom respected Octavian's lineage and propaganda, began to waver in their loyalties. But Antony remained committed to Cleopatra. The final confrontation approached. In 31 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra gathered their forces at Actium, a promontory on the western coast of Greece. Their navy, impressive but slower than Rome's, assembled in the bay. Cleopatra brought her own fleet of ships, wealth, and supplies. Antony commanded Roman legions still loyal to him, but morale was fragile. Octavian's general, Agrippa, cut off their supply lines and controlled key coastal positions. Over weeks, hunger and illness weakened Antony's army. Desertions grew. Finally, the exhausted alliance attempted to break free by sea. The Battle of Actium, fought on the sparkling waters of the Ionian Sea, would determine the fate of the ancient world. Cleopatra commanded her own squadron in the center of the fleet. Antony's ships engaged Octavian's forces. But Rome's navy was lighter, more maneuverable, and tactically superior. As the battle turned against them, Cleopatra made a decisive move, perhaps planned in advance, perhaps improvised. She broke through a gap in the fighting and sailed south with her fleet. Antony, seeing Cleopatra retreat, left the battle and followed her. With their departure, the morale of their forces collapsed. Many ships surrendered. Others were destroyed. The war was over in all but name. Antony and Cleopatra returned to Alexandria to plan their last defenses. But Octavian was relentless. His legions marched through Egypt, city by city. Antony's remaining troops surrendered or defected. Cleopatra attempted diplomacy, even sending messages to Octavian, perhaps seeking to preserve Egypt or ensure her children's safety. Octavian refused all offers. Facing inevitable defeat, Antony fought one final battle near Alexandria. When mistakenly informed that Cleopatra had taken her own life, Antony fell upon his sword in despair. Mortally wounded, he was carried to Cleopatra, who had taken refuge within her mausoleum. Antony died in her arms, tragic, dramatic, and deeply symbolic of the end of an era. Cleopatra, now alone, realized that her fate was no longer hers to command. Octavian arrived in Alexandria. He intended to take Cleopatra alive to Rome, to parade her in a triumph, a symbol of his victory over the last pharaoh. Cleopatra refused such humiliation. After meeting with Octavian and ensuring that her children would be spared, Cleopatra prepared for her final act. On August 12, 30 BCE, just weeks after Antony's death, Cleopatra ended her life. The method remains a subject of legend: the bite of an asp, poison smuggled into her chamber, or a needle concealed in a hairpin. The truth may never be known. What is certain is that Cleopatra chose dignity over captivity. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Egypt, after more than 3,000 years of pharaonic history, became a province of the Roman Empire. The great line of kings and queens that stretched from Narmer to Cleopatra, through pyramids, conquests, temples, and wonders, came to its close. But though Egypt's political independence had ended, its cultural legacy would endure. Its temples remained standing. Its language continued to be spoken. Its spiritual traditions persisted in new forms. Alexandria remained a center of learning under Roman rule. And Cleopatra herself, charismatic, ambitious, brilliant, became immortal in story, symbol, and memory. The ancient kingdom had reached its final turning point. Yet the river of history continued to flow, and Egypt, ever resilient, continued to transform in the centuries ahead. With Cleopatra's death and the fall of Alexandria in 30 BCE, Egypt ceased to be an independent kingdom. The long line of pharaohs, stretching back through Cleopatra's ancestors, through the Ptolemies, through the Persian and Libyan rulers, through the New Kingdom and Old Kingdom, all the way to Narmer, finally reached its end. The ancient throne of Horus was absorbed into the expanding Roman Empire, and Egypt became a province under the authority of a Roman prefect appointed directly by the emperor. Yet even under Roman rule, Egypt remained a land unlike any other. Its grain fields fed the empire. Its temples inspired awe. Its Nile flowed with a rhythm unchanged for millennia. Though the political structure had shifted, the cultural heartbeat of Egypt continued to echo through its people, its rituals, and its ancient traditions. The Romans recognized the land's immense value. Egypt became the personal possession of the Roman emperor, not just another province. This meant that senators were forbidden from entering Egypt without permission, an extraordinary measure that reflected Egypt's strategic importance. Grain from the fertile Nile Valley was essential to feeding the enormous population of Rome. A stable Egypt meant a stable empire. The Roman prefect stationed in Alexandria governed with a blend of Roman law and existing Egyptian administration. The bureaucracy remained intricate, with scribes and officials recording harvests, taxes, and trade. Greek continued as the administrative language, while Egyptian was spoken by the common people. Latin was present, but mostly among soldiers and officials. Alexandria flourished under Rome. Its port bustled with ships carrying spices, wine, olive oil, papyrus, linen, and exotic goods. The lighthouse on Pharos Island, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, still guided sailors safely to shore. The library, though damaged over time, continued to function as a center of learning, preserving scrolls and attracting scholars from across the Mediterranean. Roman emperors visited Egypt rarely, but when they did, they were captivated. Augustus, the first emperor, respected Egyptian customs enough to allow priests and temples to continue their rituals. Emperor Hadrian later founded a city in memory of his beloved companion Antinous along the Nile. Others came as tourists, marveling at pyramids that were already ancient beyond imagination. But while Roman Egypt retained its splendor, deep changes slowly unfolded. One of the most significant shifts occurred within the religious landscape. The old temples, massive, sacred complexes devoted to gods like Ammonius, Horus, Isis, Ra, and Osiris, continued to operate, but their influence gradually waned. The priesthood, once politically powerful, now depended on imperial favor, tax exemptions, and private donations. Without royal patronage, many temples struggled to maintain rituals that required expensive offerings and specialized staff. The cult of Isis, however, spread across the Roman world. Her image, motherly, compassionate, and mystical, captured the imagination of people from Italy to Britain. Temples dedicated to Isis appeared in Rome, Pompeii, and even as far away as the German frontier. In a strange turn of fate, an Egyptian goddess achieved greater global reach under Roman rule than ever before. Meanwhile, Egyptians adapted, as they always had, integrating new beliefs into their ancient worldview. But change was accelerating. Christianity, once an obscure sect, began spreading rapidly throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Egypt, with its large Jewish population, its Greek intellectual circles, and its social diversity, became fertile ground for new religious ideas. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, Christian communities had taken root in Alexandria and other cities. Early Christian thinkers, such as Clement of Alexandria and Origen, wrote theological works that blended Greek philosophy with emerging Christian doctrine. The city became a major center of Christian scholarship. Yet this transition was gradual. For generations, Egyptians practiced traditional polytheistic worship alongside Christianity. Temples continued their daily rites. Priests maintained rituals that had been performed for thousands of years. But the foundation of the old system was changing. The turning point came when Christianity was legalized across the Roman Empire in the early 4th century under Emperor Constantine. Suddenly, a previously persecuted faith gained imperial support. Churches were built. Bishops gained influence. Pagan temples, while not immediately banned, began losing state backing. The people of Egypt, long accustomed to honoring multiple gods, now faced a transforming spiritual landscape. Some embraced the new faith enthusiastically. Others clung to the traditions of their ancestors. In rural areas, ancient rituals persisted for centuries. But the tide had turned. During the later Roman Empire, Egypt faced economic pressures, administrative reforms, and increasing control from Constantinople, the new capital created by Constantine. As imperial power shifted eastward, Egypt's role changed too. It remained vital for grain production, but waves of political and military instability affected daily life. One of the most remarkable religious transformations of Egypt occurred in the deserts. By the late 3rd and early 4th centuries, Christian monks and hermits sought isolation in the wilderness, retreating into caves, abandoned quarries, and small huts. Figures like Saint Anthony the Great and Saint Pachomius founded forms of monasticism that influenced the entire Christian world. Egyptian deserts became sanctuaries of silence, meditation, and ascetic devotion. The spiritual writings of these early monks would echo for centuries throughout Christian tradition. While Christianity blossomed, the ancient temples struggled. Imperial edicts gradually restricted pagan worship. Some temples were closed or converted into churches. Others fell into disrepair. The grand temple complexes, Luxor, Karnak, Philae, Edfu, Dendra, still stood proudly, but their sacred life slowly faded. The final blow to ancient Egyptian religion came during the Byzantine era, when worship of the old gods was banned outright. The last known hieroglyphic inscription, carved on a temple wall at Philae in 394 CE, marks the symbolic end of a script that had endured for more than 3 millennia. The sacred language of the pharaohs fell silent, preserved only in the memories of priests whose lineage could no longer continue. Yet Egypt remained a land of profound cultural intermingling. Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Jewish, and Christian traditions blended into a rich tapestry. The city of Alexandria remained one of the most important intellectual centers in the world. Its scholars contributed to mathematics, astronomy, theology, and medicine. Even as the classical world began to fracture, Alexandria's spirit endured. The decline of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century left Egypt firmly under Eastern, or Byzantine, control. Egyptian Christianity evolved into the Coptic Church, which used the Coptic language, a descendant of the ancient Egyptian tongue written in Greek characters with demotic additions. This new form of language preserved echoes of the past even as the culture transformed. Life for most Egyptians changed slowly. Farmers still relied on the Nile's flood cycles. Villages followed seasonal rhythms. Markets bustled with trade. Craftsmen made pottery, textiles, and tools. Families told stories of the old gods even as they attended church services. Egypt, as always, adapted. Yet the political world grew increasingly volatile. The Byzantine Empire struggled with internal disputes, theological controversies, and external threats. Factions clashed over interpretations of Christian doctrine, especially the nature of Christ, a conflict that deeply divided Egyptian Christians and church authorities in Constantinople. These tensions weakened imperial control. When the Sasanian Persian Empire briefly conquered Egypt in the early 7th century, many Egyptians saw them not as liberators but as yet another foreign power entering their ancient land. A few decades later, the Byzantine Empire reclaimed Egypt, only to lose it again, not to Persia, but to a new rising force from the Arabian Peninsula. The Arab conquests of the 7th century, led by commanders of the Rashidun Caliphate, transformed Egypt once again. In 641 CE, the Byzantine forces surrendered Alexandria. Over the next decades, Egypt was integrated into the Islamic world. The city of Fustat was founded near modern Cairo, becoming a spiritual and administrative center. Arabic gradually replaced Greek and Coptic in administration, though Coptic survived in religious contexts. The Egyptians, adaptable as ever, merged aspects of their ancient heritage with the new cultural, artistic, and intellectual currents introduced through Islamic rule. Temples that once honored Ra, Isis, and Ammonius fell further into ruin, their stories buried beneath centuries of shifting sands. Yet the memory of ancient Egypt never truly vanished. Local legends, folk traditions, and surviving texts carried fragments of the Old World forward. Through the Byzantine and early Islamic periods, Egypt remained a land where history lived in layers, each civilization building upon the one before it. Even as the ancient age receded into memory, its monuments stood as towering witnesses to a bygone world. The pyramids still rose above the desert horizon. The Sphinx watched silently over the sands. Columns and statues lay half-buried, waiting for rediscovery. Papyrus manuscripts lay sealed in tombs. And beneath 1,000 years of change, the heartbeat of the ancient world continued to echo, faint but unbroken. Egypt was entering a new chapter yet again. But its ancient legacy, its art, its writing, its myths, its stories carved in stone, was never truly lost. It waited, quiet and patient, for a future time when the world would once again learn to read its secrets. When the Arabs entered Egypt in the 7th century, the land of the Nile once again shifted into a new chapter of its long, extraordinary history. Under the Rashidun and Umayyad caliphates, Egypt became part of a vast Islamic empire stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to Central Asia. Yet, as always, Egypt's ancient character remained present beneath every transformation. The early Arab governors recognized Egypt's immense agricultural importance. The Nile harvest sustained not only local populations but shipped grain eastward to feed bustling cities like Medina, Damascus, and later Baghdad. Administrators implemented new irrigation systems, tax structures, and reforms to keep the Nile Valley productive. Fustat, Egypt's new capital, became a vibrant center of trade, scholarship, and religious life. Mosques rose beside traditional marketplaces, and merchants brought spices, textiles, ivory, and papyrus from across the known world. Still, hints of the ancient world lingered everywhere. The pyramids stood silent as they had for millennia. The Sphinx watched over the desert, its features softened by centuries of wind. Great temples at Luxor, Karnak, Dendera, and Philae remained intact, though many were slowly being buried by drifting sands. To the Arabs, these structures were works of mystery, monuments built by peoples of unimaginable antiquity. Medieval Arab travelers, scholars, and chroniclers wrote about ancient Egypt with fascination. Writers like al-Masudi, Ibn Jubair, and al-Idrisi recorded descriptions of the pyramids, often mixing observation with legend. Some attributed these towering structures to prophets or ancient kings mentioned in early stories. Others tried to measure them, decipher inscriptions, or speculate about their construction. The Egyptians themselves, living in small villages near the ancient ruins, passed down oral traditions, some accurate echoes of deep history, others entirely mythical. In places like Philae, in the far south, ancient rituals persisted longer than anywhere else. Even into the 6th century CE, long after temples elsewhere had closed, priests continued to honor Isis in secret. When Islamic rule spread across Egypt, many of these ancient cults faded, not through conflict but through the gradual merging of cultures, languages, and beliefs. During the medieval period, Egypt became a crossroads of civilizations. Under the Fatimid Caliphate, Cairo was founded, a magnificent new city north of Fustat. Scholars from across the Islamic world gathered there, contributing to mathematics, medicine, astronomy, architecture, and literature. In the Coptic Church, ancient liturgical songs and prayers, sung in the Coptic language, a direct descendant of ancient Egyptian speech, survived as echoes of the Old World. Despite centuries of transformation, ancient Egypt never truly vanished. Its monuments remained unavoidable, visible, immovable. Farmers plowed fields beside fallen statues. Children played games among the ruins. Sandstorms revealed buried fragments, broken columns, shattered reliefs, lost tomb entrances. European travelers who passed through Egypt during the medieval and early Renaissance periods took note of these wonders. They marveled at the pyramids, puzzled over the hieroglyphs, and returned home with tales of giants, sorcerers, and lost civilizations. Yet for most Europeans, Egypt remained a place of distant legend, difficult to reach and little understood. This began to change in the 17th and 18th centuries, when curiosity about the ancient world reached new heights in Europe. Explorers, artists, merchants, and diplomats traveled more frequently to the eastern Mediterranean. The rise of scientific inquiry created a hunger for knowledge about ancient cultures. Egypt, with its massive monuments and unreadable scripts, captured the imagination of scholars. The turning point came near the end of the 18th century, with an event that would forever alter the fate of Egypt's ancient mysteries, Napoleon Bonaparte's expedition to Egypt. In 1798, Napoleon invaded Egypt, not only with soldiers but with a large team of scholars, engineers, artists, linguists, and scientists. Their mission was not merely conquest, it was documentation. These intellectuals formed the Institut d'Egypte, tasked with studying the land, its people, its wildlife, its architecture, and, most importantly, its ancient monuments. Napoleon himself was captivated by the pyramids. Before the Battle of the Pyramids, he famously told his soldiers, "Soldiers, from the top of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." Though apocryphal or polished by history, the quote reflects the awe Europeans felt when witnessing the scale of Egypt's past. The scholars accompanying Napoleon mapped temples, measured sphinxes, surveyed ruins, and made detailed drawings of artifacts. Their monumental work, Description de l'Égypte, would later fill over 20 volumes, an encyclopedia of Egyptian antiquity unlike anything the world had ever seen. But the most significant discovery occurred not through planning, but through chance. In 1799, during fortification work near the town of Rosetta, Rashid, in the Nile Delta, French soldiers uncovered a dark stone slab inscribed with three scripts, hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek. This artifact became known as the Rosetta Stone. Though no one yet understood the Egyptian scripts, the presence of Greek, well understood by scholars, offered hope. If the three inscriptions conveyed the same text in different languages, then the Greek version could unlock the others. When the French surrendered to the British in 1801, the stone was taken to London, where it remains today. Deciphering it would become one of the greatest intellectual challenges of the 19th century. For decades, scholars struggled to crack the code of hieroglyphs. Many believed the symbols represented purely mystical or symbolic meanings, not phonetic ones. But one scholar, an extraordinary linguist from France, refused to give up. Jean-François Champollion, fluent in many ancient languages, devoted years to studying the Rosetta Stone and other inscriptions. He compared symbols, analyzed patterns, and examined the Greek text for context. Slowly, he identified royal names, such as Ptolemy and Cleopatra, written in cartouches. He realized that hieroglyphs could represent sounds, not just concepts. In 1822, after nearly 2 decades of work, Champollion succeeded. He presented his breakthrough. The hieroglyphic script was a complex system combining phonetic characters, determinatives, and ideograms. It could now be read. For the first time in more than 1,400 years, the voices of ancient Egypt could speak again. Champollion's discovery marked the birth of modern Egyptology, a field whose scholars, archaeologists, and adventurers would soon unearth hidden tombs, decipher lost histories, and reconstruct the forgotten narratives of an entire civilization. Across the 19th century, Egypt became a magnet for exploration. Giovanni Belzoni, a former circus strongman turned explorer, entered towering temples and cleared sand from colossal statues. Auguste Mariette founded the Egyptian Antiquities Service. Amelia Edwards documented the Nile in her vivid travel writings, inspiring new generations of archaeologists. Villages near ancient sites saw an influx of visitors searching for treasures, knowledge, and adventure. Museums across Europe and America competed to collect artifacts. Temples were mapped, tombs opened, mummies examined, statues catalogued. For the first time in centuries, the stories carved on tomb walls, stories of kings, queens, artisans, farmers, scribes, and gods, were understood again. Ancient hymns to Ra, love songs written on papyrus, letters between families, medical texts, magical spells, administrative records, voices that had been silent now returned. Yet this flood of exploration raised concerns. Artifacts were removed from their original settings, often with little documentation. Tombs were disturbed. Local communities sometimes saw their heritage taken abroad. Over time, Egypt introduced laws to protect its ancient treasures and established museums to preserve its own history. Still, the rediscovery of ancient Egypt transformed global culture. Hieroglyphic motifs appeared in art, architecture, and literature. The Sphinx and pyramids became symbols of mystery and wonder. Egyptian motifs influenced jewelry, furniture, theater costumes, and early cinema. The world became enchanted by a civilization that had long been buried beneath sand and time. By the early 20th century, a new generation of archaeologists continued the work. Among them was Howard Carter, whose persistence led to one of the greatest discoveries in history, the nearly intact tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. Inside, Carter and his team uncovered treasures that astonished the world: golden shrines, chariots, jewelry, statues, and the iconic funerary mask of the Boy King. This discovery brought ancient Egypt into the modern age with electric immediacy. newspapers printed photographs of the treasures. Crowds gathered in museums to glimpse artifacts. Egyptomania swept across Europe and America, affecting fashion, design, and film. Egypt's ancient heritage had reawakened. Through centuries of change, Pharaonic, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Islamic, Ottoman, and modern, Egypt's past endured as a quiet undercurrent. Its monuments waited patiently for rediscovery. Its stories slept in tombs sealed with ancient prayers. Its gods lingered in memory, its language survived in Coptic hymns, and its legacy lived on in every stone etched with hieroglyphs. By the time the world reached the modern era, ancient Egypt had reclaimed its place not only in academic study but in the imagination of humanity. A civilization once forgotten was now celebrated, studied, and preserved. And its story, still unfolding, continued to influence art, science, and the search for understanding. The Nile, as always, flowed onward, an eternal witness to the past, present, and future of the land it nourishes. By the dawn of the 20th century, ancient Egypt had become the subject of intense global fascination. Archaeologists from around the world journeyed to the Nile Valley, eager to uncover the secrets buried beneath centuries of sand. Some came with scholarly devotion, others arrived with ambitions of fame. Egypt, as it always had, inspired awe and wonder in equal measure. For decades, teams excavated temples, tombs, and forgotten cities. The Valley of the Kings, once the secret resting place of pharaohs, became a focus of exploration. Many of its tombs had been opened or robbed in antiquity, their treasures long removed. But there were whispers among Egyptologists of one tomb still hidden, one burial that remained untouched, the tomb of a little-known boy king named Tutankhamun. British archaeologist Howard Carter dedicated years of his life to finding it. Working under the patronage of Lord Carnarvon, he explored the valley systematically. Season after season passed without major discoveries. Funding dwindled. Hope began to fade. But Carter refused to give up. He believed, with unwavering certainty, that the tomb still existed somewhere beneath the sands. In November 1922, near the entrance to Ramesses VI's tomb, Carter's workers found a stone step hidden beneath debris. Excavation revealed a staircase. The steps descended toward a sealed doorway. On the plaster were faint impressions of seals bearing the cartouche of Tutankhamun. Carter held his breath. This was the moment he had chased for decades. When the door was breached, he peered through a small hole. Lord Carnarvon, standing behind him, asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter replied, "Yes, wonderful things." Beyond the door lay a chamber filled with treasures untouched for more than 3,000 years. Statues of gods. Thrones of gold. Chariots covered in gilded wood. Delicate jewelry. Beds shaped like mythic beasts. Boxes carved with protective spells. Containers holding perfumes, oils, food, and clothing prepared for the afterlife. And deeper still, behind two more sealed doorways, lay the sarcophagus, and within it, the nested coffins, including the breathtaking gold mask of Tutankhamun, perhaps the most iconic artifact in the world. For years, Carter and his team catalogued and removed these masterpieces, working with meticulous care. Each discovery captured worldwide attention, sparking Egyptomania across Europe and America. Photographs of the treasures filled newspapers. Artists drew inspiration from Egyptian motifs. Jewelry, fashion, and architecture reflected the aesthetic of the ancient world. King Tut, once a forgotten monarch, became a symbol of Egypt's eternal allure. But Egypt was changing. The days of foreign domination and colonial archaeology were drawing to a close. Egyptians sought greater control over their own heritage. The nationalist movement grew rapidly, demanding independence from British rule. In 1922, the same year Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered, Egypt was declared an independent kingdom, albeit with restrictions still imposed by Britain. Throughout the mid-20th century, Egyptian scholars and archaeologists rose to prominence. Figures like Zaki Saad, Salim Hassan, Ahmed Fakhri, and later Zahi Hawass devoted their lives to studying, preserving, and presenting their country's ancient history. New technologies improved excavation methods. Tombs were documented more carefully. Conservation techniques advanced. Egyptians became not only guardians of their heritage but leaders in global archaeological research. The next major turning point came in the 1950s and 60s, with an ambitious national project, the construction of the Aswan High Dam. The dam promised economic development, electricity, and flood control for modern Egypt. But the rising waters of Lake Nasser threatened to submerge dozens of ancient temples and archaeological sites in Nubia. These included massive complexes such as Abu Simbel, Philae, Amada, Wadi Sebua, and Kalabsha, each representing priceless chapters of history. Faced with the imminent loss of these monuments, Egypt sought international support. In 1960, UNESCO launched an unprecedented global campaign to save the temples, a project that brought together engineers, archaeologists, and governments from across the world. The most extraordinary feat of engineering and preservation was the relocation of Abu Simbel. Carved into a mountainside by Ramesses II more than 3,200 years earlier, the temple's massive statues towered over 20 meters high. Cutting the temple into blocks, moving them, and reconstructing them required precision and courage. Engineers carefully sliced the mountain and temple into over 1,000 blocks, each weighing up to 30 tons. The blocks were lifted, transported, and reassembled on higher ground, creating an artificial mountain to preserve the temple's original form. The alignment with the sun, designed to illuminate the inner sanctuary twice each year, was preserved with remarkable accuracy. Other temples were dismantled and relocated piece by piece. Some were gifted to nations that contributed significantly to the rescue effort. The Temple of Dendar was given to the United States and now stands in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Temple of Dibad was given to Spain and reassembled in Madrid. These international monuments became symbols of global cooperation and shared heritage. The Nubian Salvage Project was one of the greatest achievements in archaeological conservation, demonstrating humanity's commitment to preserving the past even as the modern world advanced. Back in Egypt, new discoveries continued steadily. Archaeologists uncovered tombs in the Valley of the Queens, including the beautifully decorated tomb of Nefertari, sometimes called the Sistine Chapel of Egypt, for its vibrant frescoes. Excavations revealed workers' villages, burial grounds, and administrative archives. Advanced imaging techniques began allowing researchers to explore sealed chambers without opening them. Egypt also renewed its commitment to preserving monuments affected by pollution, tourism, and environmental factors. Temples like Luxor and Karnak underwent extensive restoration. The pyramids received conservation treatments to stabilize their structures. Museums were expanded and modernized to house growing collections of artifacts. In Cairo, the construction of the Grand Egyptian Museum, located near the Giza Plateau, became a monumental effort to create the largest archaeological museum in the world. Designed to hold tens of thousands of items, including the entire Tutankhamun collection, it represented a new era in presenting Egypt's ancient history to the world. Throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Egypt fostered its identity as a guardian of its own past. Under the guidance of the Egyptian Antiquities Authority and local scholars, excavation missions increasingly partnered with international teams under strict ethical guidelines. Artifacts remained in Egypt. Conservation became the priority. Knowledge, rather than treasure, became the central focus. Meanwhile, ancient Egypt continued to influence global culture. Films, novels, documentaries, video games, and school curriculums kept the pharaohs alive in public imagination. Egyptology became a formal academic discipline, with universities worldwide offering specialized study. Scholars debated interpretations of hieroglyphic texts, reconstructed daily life in ancient villages, and used satellite imagery to identify hidden structures beneath the sand. Yet perhaps the most powerful legacy of modern archaeology is its human dimension. The stories uncovered are not only of kings and queens but also of ordinary people, scribes, artisans, farmers, children. Their letters, tools, toys, and tombs reveal a world full of emotion, ambition, struggle, and dreams. They remind us that the people of ancient Egypt were not distant mythic figures but humans living lives rich with meaning. And through all these centuries of excavation, restoration, triumph, and challenge, one constant endures: the Nile. The river, unchanged in its course for thousands of years, still flows from south to north, carrying life to the fields and cities along its banks. The sun still rises over the eastern desert and sets behind the western hills, where generations of Egyptians buried their dead, believing in a journey beyond life. Foreign empires came and went: Persians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Ottomans, British. Ideologies shifted. Religions transformed. Languages changed. Yet Egypt's ancient monuments remained, silent but alive with memory. The pyramids, once tombs for kings, became symbols of human ambition. The temples, once homes of gods, became museums of stone. Hieroglyphs, once prayers to eternity, became keys to knowledge. And the story of Egypt, its triumphs, tragedies, innovations, and mysteries, continued to unfold, drawing new generations into its enduring spell. In the modern world, Egypt stands as a bridge between its ancient past and its living present. Its monuments inspire. Its scholarly work enlightens. Its heritage belongs not only to Egyptians but to all humanity. And the sands, ever shifting, protect secrets yet to be discovered.